It is so cool to talk to you. I have been a fan of your work, and I want to say I think I learned more about what actually goes into making movies from some of the special features I've seen you do way back on many different things than maybe any other singular source. So it's very exciting for me.
Well,
And I'm
thank you.
happy to be sitting here talking to you.
Yeah, so Wikipedia, of course, is my only competition. On film knowledge. No, it's not true, but thank you. I've always had a
I
love for film history, and
I've interviewed Walter Murch before, which was really
oh,
exciting,
the great
and
Walter. Yeah.
I've talked to Mark Mangini. So things about editing and sound design are some of my I think some of the most underrated elements of what actually creates the experience people are having when they're watching a movie. And so I kind of wanted to start by asking you, just throwing out a couple of these things that you've used to craft the worlds we know so well. John Wayne's voice, your car in a driveway, a 35 millimeter projector. When does inspiration, are you always ready when inspiration strikes? What is it that strikes you that you're like, oh, I could use this to like create an auditory world, you know?
When it comes to sound design, a lesson I've learned is that if I hear something in my daily activity, I may not be even at work. I mean, it could be anywhere, home or shopping. If I hear a sound that catches my attention, then I'm obliged to try to record it and capture it. Even if I don't know how it might be used, the fact that it caught my attention among all the other, com competing sounds in our environment means that it has some emotional meaning, that it has its inspiration. So um, I used to go out, of course, and still do, not as often, on expeditions just to gather sound, where you're focused. You go to a rocket launch at Cape Kennedy, and you're specifically trying to record a liftoff of a rocket. But while you're there, you might find some unusual seabirds, or there might be something. I remember something wrong with the Coke machine in the mission controls that made sort of a weird hum. And you're waiting around, so you record that. And this inventory of everyday sounds then becomes useful as elements later. Ultimately, I think I use everything I've recorded, somewhere along the line. I go back, even now, I'll go back to tapes I made in the early 70s and find something that's still inspiring.
That's amazing. And it's like you've I think you've talked a little bit about this kind of organic crafting of sound that like building out of pieces from the real world and like repurposing them kind of. Because that's like where all these great little things come from, right? Like Chewbacca, for example, like he comes from a bunch of other sounds kind of crafted together. Do you just like tinker with them like in the lab and then you're like, "Oh, that's I think I got it," kind of thing?
My process really started a lot with George Lucas on the first Star Wars movie, where he asked for um, a palette of sounds. There were hundreds of things needed for the first Star Wars movie,
Yeah.
and science fiction had been mostly electronic sounds. That was in a way the cliche that existed at that point. And he said, well, no, we've got to build this stuff out of the real world, out of real motors, real animals, so it has a naturalistic, element to it. And so it got me going down that path. For science fiction, especially, the you want to create these illusions with sound, just like visual effects creates illusions with models and matte paintings and things.
Yeah.
Um, and so I would set out on a path to collect things in the real world. Uh, and for example, Chewbacca, which was my first assignment, because I was working a year or so before they were actually going to start shooting the movie. But they wanted to know, well, how are we going to treat Chewbacca on the set? How will he, act, open and close his mouth with a puppet
Yeah.
mask, really?
Yeah.
And so I was to work on that first. And George Lucas wanted it to be made out of animal sounds, something, so that it's not derived from a human voice, because a human voice is almost always recognizable no matter what you do to it. He can't fool the audience. So he said he maybe dogs, maybe bears, uh, maybe other mammals we might find, some crazy rodent of some kind, who knows? And I started collecting things, starting going to do bears, actually focus on them specifically. And Chewbacca ended up being manufactured out of vocalizations from this one young bear cub that we found out in Tehachapi, California. It belonged to a man named Monty Cox, who was provided animals for movies.
Huh.
Uh, you know, lions, elephants, whatever. He had a farm, a ranch with all of these animals, yeah, on it. And so we went there specifically to hire his young this young bear cub. The bear was named Pooh, and
I didn't know
like
any of this, and I've
yeah,
read the book.
like Winnie the Pooh, I suppose. And
Right. Right.
being a bear cub, it was docile and friendly, and still, wouldn't bite your arm off, as it might do when it got to be an adult. And we spent a day at his ranch trying to get the bear to make different sounds. And that meant normally teasing it with food that it wanted and not giving it food right away. And it would cry, and it would growl and so on. And didn't know at the time I'd be talking about this, almost 50 years later, but it those recordings were brought back. That time we worked on tape, on magnetic
Yeah.
tape, and I would cut them up with a razor blade, the different sounds, and inventory them. And then I could start making copies of them and cutting them together to build little sentences, little phrases. And you could,
Yeah.
of course, change the speed of the sounds so you could have lower pitch and higher pitch, and you could run things backwards. It was physical at that time.
Yeah.
You're not cutting and pasting in a computer program. You're just working with splicing tape and magnetic recordings in your hands. And I started building up phrases and testing it out. So it actually worked pretty quickly, I think. It came to the point where there was enough confidence in the sounds I had gathered and made up that they figured it would work, later.
Yeah, and he
So
has
yeah,
his own vernacular eventually, and his own
yeah.
vocabulary, and his own everything, and he's performing. And you continued to build off that, I guess, for everything since. I'm kind of curious because you talk a little bit about working with George Lucas, how you guys started it, how you've developed it, but you edited the prequels. You've been on this ride for so much of it. And we're coming on this 50th anniversary of Empire, which is an incredible movie. Um, can you talk a little bit about your collaboration with him, what it's like collaborating with him, and what you feel? Well, yeah, let's start there, and then because I'd also kind of like to know what you think you'd like to see in Star Wars, is because it's prolific, it's continuing to spawn more. But what do you and George? What was your dynamic like, and what was it like?
Well, when I started, I was low on the ladder. I was called a production assistant, and I was pretty much working independently. Uh, George Lucas and Gary Kurtz, the producer of the films, they sent me a Nagra tape recorder, very nice
Yeah.
professional recording machine, a couple of microphones, and I was working out of my apartment in Los Angeles. And it was up to me to sort of schedule appointments, call up the zoo and see if I could come and record a bear or a cougar or something like that. And I wouldn't always have uh, something I could record every day because I would be working ahead. And so they would use me to do other things, run errands. I would drive into Hollywood I was helping gather up lenses and VistaVision equipment for ILM that were building their new printers. I was sent to test out costumes at Western Costume for extras in the cantina. So I went
Oh
there,
man.
put on a lot of different costumes, took a Polaroid of myself, sent it in, for various extras that eventually ended up being, in the background.
Yeah.
Movie. One of my jobs was to take Carrie Fisher to the hairdresser to get hairdo tests. And
So are you one of the first ones to see the buns?
well, yeah, it's interesting because the my job was just to go to her house in Beverly Hills and pick her up and take her to the hair salon. I wish there was some recording of whatever we talked about in the car. Because I spent a day with her, and I know she was a little bit nervous because she had been cast, but of course she didn't know what was lying ahead. Neither of us knew what was down the road. I just wish I knew what we talked about. I mean, I know a few things, but it was more than small talk. But they tried different hairdos. They put wigs on, so she was blonde. She was a redhead. She had long hair. The funny thing is when they finished, we were about ready to go home. Maybe we had done 7 or 8 different, and I took the pictures of her to send to George Lucas, and they rolled her hair up and put it in the small buns on either side.
Right.
Go home, and I took a picture of that. Now I don't know whether that's where it began. Uh, I think there were further hair development later in England when they got more serious about it. But anyways, I had this time for months where I was doing all kinds of miscellaneous things on the film. And it took me to ILM every day or so, and I would see the progress on the model making and the Death Star trench and all the things they were doing. And in fact, I was very interested. I was as much interested in the visual effects as
Yeah.
the audible effects because I had done my master's thesis at USC on building a special film compositing system to take images and put them together in camera for students to do
Interesting.
some special effects. And,
Yeah.
and I was torn a little bit between visual and audio effects, and I started. I had minor things that I did minor things at ILM along with Dennis Murin, who was new at that time, and shooting background plates of stars and backgrounds of the Death Star surface below.
You just had your fingerprints on like every little corner.
Well, I did have a very interesting kind of Forrest Gump kind of experience where I was just poking my head into different things, and I worked on the computer animation for the Death Star trench, uh,
Wow.
and animation of I shot a lot of the elements that are on their back projected onto the little screens, like targeting in the spaceships and in the
Yeah.
control rooms, just minor stuff.
Did
But
you, when you were
yeah,
doing all these different little things,
yeah.
did you feel like this is insane, this project, or did you think this is just thrilling because it's doing all this different stuff? Did you think it was going to work? I mean, obviously, no one
Yeah.
could have known what it was going to be, but
Well, just think of our naivete at the time. There was no Star Wars, of course, was not established as anything.
sure.
And without an internet and so on, there was no way for information to just, fan out through the world. But privately, those of us working on it, myself and others that were all in a similar age bracket and career um, position. We were just excited for this one film. Basically, to me, this was a film like I wanted to make in my backyard as a kid.
Yeah.
It's a space adventure. It had elements of a Western, gunfights and sword fights. So it's like Robin Hood. It had
Yeah.
fantasy on robots and things. So it was something I felt very familiar and comfortable with. Anyone that grew up, reading comic books and
Sure.
watching Superman on TV, this we did.
Yeah.
So we had that shared experience of the excitement of making it, and we are making it for ourselves. Not thinking about is it going to be a box office success. At that time, no one expected a blockbuster. Nobody had any inkling that it would get talked about more than or even seen by a wide audience. At that time, fantasy films like that were like the Ray Harryhausen movies. They come
Yeah.
once in a while, or Planet of the Apes. It had
Yeah.
its own niche audience.
There was no concept of a blockbuster. You created it.
No, no, it wasn't. I mean, it's so familiar to us now, but
Yeah.
that all happened in the wake of release of the film,
Yeah.
and forever changed everybody's career uh, trajectory who worked on it.
Yeah.
So that was a big surprise, but it was made out of a love for the genre that it was, you
Do
know.
you just again the kind of second part of that question, and then I guess we'll wrap is again kind of looking at Star Wars today, looking at this it's built the whole world of blockbusters is Star Wars built it,
Yeah.
in what we see all the time.
It
But
sort of derives, from that, yeah, those that,
yeah, that's
yeah,
primordial stew you guys had. But like
yeah, right.
what's your feeling like what do you because you've created so much. What do you wish you saw created more, or how do you want to see things pushed? You pushed the boundaries. You were right there.
Yeah.
Like, what's kind of stuff you'd like to see them try, or in the industry, but in Star Wars,
Well, uh, you're asking me a question that Disney's trying to answer too. You know, those of us that worked on, well, I'll speak for myself. Of course, it was embedded in our careers in my career for, 35, 40 years, I suppose. Yes, making contributions. Of course, when you look at it and it gets, goes to its next generation and maybe two generations, you can look at it with a little critical eye and say, I if I was under control of myself, I would search for just new ideas, new places to have an adventure. You've got a whole galaxy out there, and I know that the difficulty with Star Wars is escaping from all the elements that people love,
Mm,
and so the tendency is to remake something, but just bigger, wider, more of them. If we had a dogfight with, two X-wings, now it's 200 X-wings. That's part of the general trend in cinema for these,
yes,
blockbuster science fiction films,
yes,
is to just make it as grand and epic and as possible. And that's a burden to some extent too on the
yeah,
filmmakers to see you've got to make it. How can we make it louder, brighter, longer, whatever, and it's a tough choice. Um, but I think that there'll be some kind of discovery. I think there's some elements of obviously in the streaming series that is planting seeds, which if it catches on with the audience will maybe help point in a direction that Star Wars should go.
yeah.
But I don't want to be the one that try to be responsible by
You,
predicting. I'm
you've
not.
already pushed the boundary and
I'm not
created
just,
stuff.
yeah, much of a part of it. I mean, those of us that have that legacy of working on it, naturally I look at them and I think, well, there's good. Wow, what craftsmanship now you can, from a visual effects standpoint, you can just imagine anything and you can have it appear fluidly, and there's just boundless uh, opportunities there. The visual effects become almost normal. I mean,
Yeah,
they are. Yeah,
yeah.
so where there was a huge struggles to do one shot of a land speeder floating through town in the first Star Wars, and an agonizing challenge for George Lucas and the whole team to just get a floating car to go by camera without seeing the trick of
Do
how.
you think it was better? Do you think in some ways that helped because limitation, or do you think that it doesn't matter? Like, do you think that that limitation was a creative breeding ground, or do you think that it like because with the prequels, you guys definitely explored very different things too.
Yeah. Well, I think limitations are very good to have because it forces you to be very concise in your thinking. What do I really need to create for this scene in order to advance the story and make it clear to the audience? And if you have, it's kind of that syndrome where you're out shooting on location, and suddenly you realize that the sun is going down, and you've only got an hour, and you haven't finished the scene or the day's work, and so you start throwing out pages, and instead of having an elaborate dolly shot, you guys just sit there. We'll have, you walk past a light, and you'll just see a face or something. You're forced to be into a point where you just, what do we need to serve the storyline and be done before the sun goes down? And often that's your best material, because
Yeah.
you have a gut reaction to what you want to do, and you desperately do it. And so limits are good. I mean, even when they do these mega blockbusters and they spend untold millions of dollars, they sense limitations too.
Yeah, yeah,
But
yeah,
it's not like they're
yeah.
completely wasteful or anything of that sort.
Sure.
But you do, I think, get seduced a bit by the enormous mechanism of making these films. Look at the size of the credits in
Yeah,
so many of the heavy visual effects films.
it's
Thousands of people, it seems like,
it's
or 1,000 people
astounding.
on a film.
Yes.
And that's just managing that's kind of
Yeah.
almost impossible. Um,
Well, I don't want to take I've already
yeah.
gone over. I've could talk forever about this stuff.
Okay.
I've been a huge fan and I really appreciate it. Congratulations on this, the 50th anniversary for Empire and TCM Festival. Hopefully I'll see
Yeah.
you there.
Yeah. It's a me. I can't believe it. Can't believe
It'll
it.
be fun to experience it yet again in a
Oh
theater.
yeah,
Always
yeah. I
is.
haven't watched it for a long time, so it'll be fun to see it.
Awesome.
Um,
Well, it was great talking to you. Thanks again, Ben.
You're welcome. So long.